Hi, this is Joe Castro, Salesforce Certified Technical Architect, and this is the first in a series of what I'm calling my 2-minute drills. Put them together, they're the gauntlet. Be able to run the gauntlet to be able to be very well prepared for your Certified Tech Arc Oral Review Board. Just a couple of housekeeping items first. How this is going to work is I'm going to put on screen a 1-paragraph scenario. You should time yourself and only give yourself 2 minutes to read it. After 2 minutes, set your own timer. I would start a recording. Record yourself. That'll help you understand, listen to yourself, see if you're coming across like you think you are. Give yourself 2 minutes. So you read it for 2 minutes and then give your solution for 2 minutes. So let's start with this first one, and I will tell you have an advantage for the guys that work for me. When I'm training this, I don't tell them what the topic is. You obviously know what this one is. It's integration. I figured I'd start off with something that everybody should be able to knock out of the park. You're back again. So how'd it go? Even if you were like me, know the topic very well, it's probably very difficult to get it done in 2 minutes. Did you allow yourself an extra minute maybe to try and wrap things up? That's good. Come back to this later. Try it again. See if you can't get the cadence down so that you know what you're looking for, so that you can quickly articulate the things that you need to know. Now, what should you need to know in this case? Well, this was Big Works manufacturing of and distribution of industrial parts and materials. So what were the important things on this integration? Well, first of all, you need to understand, you need to identify the data that needs to be integrated. Don't just say it in general, right? If there's a primary transactional object, but then there are other objects related to it, you need to make sure. So while the individual deliveries are important, did you remember to say, where am I getting the driver list from? What about the trucks and the routes, right? So it's not just one. You got to remember to make sure you've identified all the data that needs to be integrated. The next part of what you need to make sure you identify is, what are the integration patterns here, right? There were 2 different things that came up in this one. The first one from an integration pattern was that things in SAP didn't finish till at some point in the night. So there was no need for real time in that instance, right? You could have some batch ETL process bringing that over nightly. So that's important to note. Although as well, if there was anything concerning about the window in which you had to operate, you should bring up how you're going to handle that. How do you handle a failed job? How do you handle if your window is being broached? But that's that's again the complexity that might be brought up in an individual scenario. The next thing here from an integration pattern would be, you heard the drivers that are out making the deliveries. And what was important to them was they had a schedule to keep, right? And so if there was any delay, if SAP was down or the connection, something wasn't happening. Well, the assumption here was that they had internet connection. I hope I put that in there. But you couldn't wait for something to respond. So the pattern that we really wanted here was that fire and forget, right? That asynchronous, fire and forget pattern from Salesforce. And right, there are a couple of ways to do that, but make sure you identify that pattern. You don't want to lock up the rep, right? All of a sudden I can't do something. The driver can't wait and hit retry and retry and retry. They need to be driving, okay? So once you get past identifying your integration patterns, you need to identify the components, right? And at this point, you should have talked about, your middleware for the ETL job, so it can coordinate and, where it left off, when it was going to process, how it needed to do retries, as well for the integration components of when you were like SOAP or REST, bulk API, the things that you need to keep in mind. So once you understand the components that are in play, another very important part is that you understand the platform features involved. And here specifically, when we're talking about the fire and forget off the Salesforce platform, there are a few different options you have. First off, you have outbound messaging, right? Bring that up. Is it a viable, is it something that's viable? What are considerations for outbound messaging, right? In this case, right, SAP, and this was, comes from a real scenario. Outbound messaging had 2 problems for me when I tackled this a few years ago. One was that we needed that password, those name credentials, to be sent to SAP. They weren't happy with just the two-way SSL, which, by the way, is another one of the components that you should bring up, right? How are you going to authenticate the two servers together? And so that was an issue. And so, actually, that was a deal breaker for outbound messaging there. And so we ended up going with Kubel Apex callouts. But another thing for outbound messaging, just remember, when you're doing something like this and you have a delivery with multiple packages, and I need the status of individual packages, right, that's a parent-child relationship. And in this instance, the service we were calling wanted one call and wanted to know the delivery status for all the individual packages. And so outbound messaging wasn't necessarily a good candidate, right? Why would it be good? Okay, no coding on the Salesforce platform, coding somewhere else. They have to be able to account for the contract first API that they need to implement. But on the Salesforce, how could I get the children rolled up onto the parent record, right? And in this case, I actually solved that. Not something relevant to what you're doing here, but just recognize the considerations for outbound messaging. Takes care of the retries. That's great. So another, other things that you should call out, right? If you just say at future, because you're used to saying at future, well, that's great. But what happens when an at future call fails, right? There's a reason Kubel Apex is around. So if you're not familiar with Kubel Apex, make sure that you get familiar to understand what are some of the architectural considerations between those. And in this case, really, when you're doing an asynchronous fire and forget, you need to account for the fact that a call might not go through. Right? And what do you do? You might also consider making that call if it's potentially a long-running call, right? There's continuation servers that could be involved. So just think through all those things. Looking at my notes here, what else from a platform features? Name credentials. No. So with that, I hope you're able to, in 2 minutes, get through this, identify the patterns involved, the data, the components, and the platform-specific features. Try it again. Hope you do better the next time, and there'll definitely be some more integration 2-minute drills coming. Thank you.